Welcome to the Aconic Podcast with me, Soon Yu, your host. The Aconic Podcast features candid conversations with successful Asian and AAPI leaders who share their personal journeys of challenges and triumphs. The Aconic Podcast is brought to you by the Asian American Foundation, by Gold House, and by the founders of the Asian Alumni Chapter of the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and is made possible through the generous support of Altos Ventures.
Early in my career at Stanford, I took a class that was basically you go to Stanford Medical Center and you walk with other students on rounds with one of the residents. And on the first day, I fainted. And I said to myself, Guy, maybe you shouldn't be a doctor. And then I read that dentists have the highest rate of suicide. So I said, I don't think I should be a dentist. And then my father was a legislator in Hawaii, and he never went to college. To make my parents happy, I applied to law school, and then I went to UC Davis for about 2 weeks and quit. Many people practice law for 20 years and figure out they're miserable. I figured that out in 20 days.
Welcome to the Aconic Podcast. Today, I am honored to be able to spend time with Guy Kawasaki. Guy, thank you for coming on to our podcast and for really gracing us with your wisdom and everything you're about to share.
Well, it's high tide right now in Santa Cruz, so I cannot go surfing anyway. So I thought, why not do a podcast? Yeah.
Now I know why we picked 10 a.m. because it was high tide for your surfing. Okay, it makes all the sense in the world.
But seriously, completely seriously, Madison, my producer on my side, she does not schedule any interviews at low tide because low tide is when I want to surf. So my whole life is built around the tides in Santa Cruz.
Oh, that's so wonderful. And then obviously it'll change slightly if you are vacationing in Hawaii, but
Yes, it changes.
All right.
That's how you can tell when I'm free. Just look for high tide wherever I am.
Okay, that's a great way to schedule with you. For those of you on the podcast that have never heard of Guy Kawasaki, which I'm kind of like drawing a blank as to why that could be the case, because I've grown up knowing about you my whole life and my whole career, basically, and basically, Guy is the father of what I would consider evangelism marketing. He was
Well, I don't know
yes,
about that.
you are. He was the very first evangelist for Apple.
No, second.
You were the second. Who was the first?
Yeah. Mike Boych.
Oh, Mike Boych, your roommate. Okay, we'll have to go into that. Okay, so one of the very first and probably one of the most prominent evangelists.
Well, it started with Jesus, and then it was a 2,000-year gap, and then we were there.
You were disciples of the Apple, let's call it Magna. Okay, so it's great. Anyway, and you currently actually an evangelist for one of my favorite companies, which is Canva, which we actually use on the podcast for all our design and graphics.
Yeah.
Yes, amazing stuff, right? And I have a good friend, Rob Giglio, who is also over there. He just started there about a year or two ago, and I think he's doing amazing work with the team there. Guy's also an author of, I want to get this right because every time I hear a podcast, the podcast interviewer gets it wrong because you keep like increasing every single year. You're author of 16 books right now. Is that right?
Yes. And, the safe thing to say is that Guy is the author of more than 15 books. And then you'll always be
more
right.
than a dozen. Exactly. He's also a serial entrepreneur, an investor. I think you've given birth to over a dozen different ideas, concepts, and companies that have made impacts throughout technology. And
that's a little high.
Well, I counted 10 on your website, and then I counted about 4 more others that you were involved in. Maybe you weren't exactly the founder, but you were definitely involved in.
Don't believe everything you read on the internet.
You're also the host of the Remarkable Podcast, and that's actually something that we aspire to. You have 250 episodes. This is actually recording number 14 for us. So we are brand smacking new And, one thing I wanted to share with the audience is when I met Guy, and I was a little shy, but I knew the reason I was going to meet him was because I was going to ask him to be on the podcast. And Guy was speaking at my friend's, Ray Wong's Constellation conference he has every year. And yeah, I sheepishly introduced myself and, said, you're one of my idols. I'd love for you to be on the show. And I was just struck with the amount of graciousness you showed me. You were very kind. You're very compassionate in the sense that you
You
kind of,
sure you're talking about me?
I am, man. I'm talking about you. You were, you,
Was this the thing at Half Moon Bay?
yes, it was the thing at Half Moon Bay. Yes, that's right. And you
Um, uh,
looked at me and goes, oh, I understand about podcasts. So I fully sympathize, was trying to kick one off. Yep. And, I actually would probably, we talk about this hero's journey. And you're the first hero that I really feel that kind of has embodied the spirit of both Aloha and Ohana throughout
wow.
your entire career. And, just for our listeners, Aloha is more than just hello and goodbye. I think everyone thinks it's hello and goodbye, but it's really about the idea of graciousness, kindness, compassion. And you shared that and demonstrated to me by not only saying yes, but kind of empathizing with me. Oh, I kind of know what it's like to start a podcast.
I do. I do.
And how hard it is and how many hours you need to put to make it good. And then this idea, I mean, my friend John and I took a picture with you and we sat with you for a little while as you were eating dinner. And we really felt like part of your extended family. And that's what Ohana is about. Ohana is the idea of family. And the Hawaiian version of it is more than just your immediate family. It's more than your close friends that become your uncles and your aunts or your cousins. It really is the idea of a community. And I
Yeah,
think
it's what Hillary Clinton would have described as a village,
absolutely.
right?
It is your village. It is the
Yeah.
people that you see daily, that you care about, that care about you, and that mutual care, I think, lifts everybody up. And I think that's so powerful. The other thing I just wanted to share with audience is you embody the idea of evangelist. And I know you talk a lot about the origins of the word evangelist, and it comes from you, which is, I think, gospel, and angel, which is actually a messenger. And, when you think about gospel, it's good news. And so you're really a messenger of good news. And I think the way you spin it is better than most people because I think the motivation is about helping others. It's not about
Yes.
good news about yourself or something that's going to benefit you. It's really about
Just
helping
just don't
others.
confuse evangelism with evangelicalism.
Well, there's some, like the Venn diagram overlaps, but they're not exactly the same, I would say.
No, there's no overlap anymore.
Oh, your friend was it, from Hawaiian Island Ministries. He's probably like rolling over right now. Okay. Anyway, I just feel like the idea of Aloha and Ohana have been actually the gospel you've been preaching. It's really the idea that technology is a powerful tool to amplify both Aloha and Ohana. The idea of, kindness, compassion, connection, belonging, community. All those are things that actually technology has enabled. And in fact, you've gravitated to companies, call it Apple or Canva, that have been really at the forefront of democratizing and making that technology as widely as available as possible. So I've kind of coined a new term for you. You're really about Alohana. It's like Aloha married
I
with
like that.
Ohana. Alohana. So Guy, you're the
I gotta write
Alohana
that
guy.
down. Aloha.
That's it. The
You
fact that
know,
Guy is, by the way, audience, if you're listening to podcasts, he's writing this down. That's how powerful that was.
as soon as we are done recording, I am gonna see if that's available as a license plate in California.
Let's see if the URL is available. You need to own that because that is absolutely what your whole so-called life ministry. I know we don't get religious
That
here.
is a freaking brilliant name. Oh my God.
That's right. Aloha and
I'm gonna
Ohana
write a book
married
called
together.
Alohana just to use the word.
And lastly, why I think that's really important is, this idea of Olohana is about living a remarkable life. It's one of the key ingredients to live a remarkable life, and especially around the grace part of the remarkable journey. And I think for our listeners who are listening in, I think people tune in obviously get a source of inspiration, a shared experience with the guests we have. And I think if we can get some life lessons that help us make even more remarkable heroes on our heroes' journeys, we're going to have even more future guests that are going to share some amazing stories. So that's my intro for you. I hope I don't think Chat GPT could have gotten that, but I actually went to Chat GPT and verified. Does that kind of fit with Guy's thinking? And it actually verified it. So
Well, let's hope that ChatGPT wasn't hallucinating too
I hope
much.
I wasn't hallucinating either. So let's actually start at the beginning. I know that you grew up in, I want to make sure I pronounce this right, Kalihi Valley. And I think everybody that's been in Hawaii probably passes through the valley and doesn't even realize it as they're going to Waikiki. But it's kind of the neighborhood that sort of borders Chinatown and the airport district. And it's not exactly Kahala. It's not what I've called the
No,
most posh
no, it's not.
area. Can you talk a little bit about kind of growing up in that area?
Yeah, so Kalihi is a valley and it's on the way from the Honolulu side to the Kaneohe side or the other side of the island. And it is, uh, to be kind, it is a lower middle income valley. uh, and so I don't come from wealth. It wasn't like I was born in, the Mar-a-Lago of Hawaii. But I honestly, I never ever thought I was poor. My parents provided everything. We never went hungry. We always had clothes, although you don't need that much clothes in Hawaii.
That's true. Slippers.
And yeah, so I mean, I don't want people to get this, sort of impression that this is a Horatio Algier story that he raised himself up by his bootstraps and struggled, and he got to the United States as an illegal alien with nothing on his back and one small suitcase. That's not the arc of my life. I don't have that kind of story that you would admire. I come from a lower middle class family. I had a very happy family. Like my family made a lot of sacrifices for my education, and the rest is history.
Yeah. I think what's amazing is that early on you experienced this idea of not feeling poor, not being rich, but not feeling poor because actually the spirit of the of Alohana, right? The idea of family, the idea of community, those actually made you feel rich in terms of values and in terms of the people that were around you. And I love that your dad is such a shining example of the idea of both family and community, and that he was a civil servant. I mean, he was firefighter. He did so many different roles. And I think your mom was a housewife and talk about the idea of Ohana, right? I mean, that was all
Yeah.
about Ohana. And I think your dad actually said something to you I thought was really important, which was this idea of noblesse oblige. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So noblesse oblige is this French term for the sort of obligations of the nobility. And it's not a negative thing. When you hear something like obligations of the nobility, you think of, I don't know, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, but it's not like that. This is a positive thing that if you are fortunate, you have an obligation to help others. And I truly do believe that. I may be the only person left in Silicon Valley that believes that, but no, no, actually, that's not true. I
No, I,
mean,
I think there's more and more that
yeah,
people feeling like they've lost their way.
yeah.
They've made all their money, and what do you do now, right?
Well, I'll tell you, in Silicon Valley, the vast, vast majority of people feel a sense of noblesse oblige. It just happens that you only hear about the five or so people who have zero sense of noblesse oblige, and all they care about is making crypto successful and long-term capital gains rates. That's all they care about. And I just want to throw up when I think about that.
You and I both. And I think what you'll find is when we have the icons that we were having on the show, that's one of the criteria we talk about it. We have to have people that actually have a sense of what it was like to not have everything or be entitled. And now that they've made it, a sense of wanting to do what you talk about in terms of being a remarkable person, a sense of grace.
Well, I give you a good rule of thumb. Don't have any billionaires on your show.
We've actually had a few, believe it or not. And you know what? Believe it or not, they've been so giving in terms of their vulnerability.
Who have you had?
We've just had many successful people.
I've decided to stop my net worth at 999 million. I don't want to take a chance, but I don't anticipate having that problem, but just in case.
Well, I'm glad I can empathize with not having to worry about that as the trip. Okay, so that's great. So I think it was really interesting. You did grow up. You said you weren't rich, but you never felt poor, and you were blessed in many ways because I think early on you actually had an elementary teacher that saw a lot of potential in you, and that allowed you to basically move from private to one of the. By the way, my wife and I have always researched potentially living in Hawaii, and we researched obviously the schools there. And the top school is apparently yours, right? Iolani. It's not the one that president went to, right?
He couldn't get into Iolani, so he had to go to Punahou. That's like if you can't get into Stanford, you go to USC. Same thing.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I think to talk about that, how this experience of being identified, and then the privilege, and,
Yeah,
and
so
coming from a sort of middle class to be able to go to such a nice place.
let me tell you something. So I had a sixth grade teacher. Her name was Trudy Akau, AKAU. And she told my parents that I had so much potential, they should take me out of the public school system and put me in a private school system so that I could have, the opportunity to go to college. And thank you, God, my family listened. My mother and father listened to her, and they made the sacrifices
Mhm.
so that I could go to Iolani. And when I was at Iolani, I can't even remember why, but somehow somebody told me to apply to Stanford, and somehow I got in because there is no doubt in my mind that I could not get into Stanford today. And so I went to Stanford, and that just opened up my whole life. So Trudy Akau and going to Stanford changed the entire arc of my life.
Now that might not have been the case because apparently you were pretty good at football, weren't you? And that was
Nah,
like the
not
well,
that
you were going to
good.
play
I mean,
football for was it Occidental or something, and your
yeah.
dad kind of said, "I ain't paying for that."
Well, I mean, I loved football, but you know what? I mean, one of the things you learn when you go to a school like Stanford, where everybody's an overachiever, right? That you're just a freaking speck of dust. But I mean, if I could make the case, maybe if I had gone to Occidental because I could have played football there, maybe I could be president of the United
'Cause
States.
that's where
So,
Barack Obama went, right? No, you still
Barack
would have gone to
Obama
the
would
second
be.
school in Hawaii in order for that to happen. Sorry. Are you ready to be part of a community that amplifies the voices of Asian leaders in business, government, and the arts? The founders of this podcast are members of the Asian Alumni Chapter of the Stanford Graduate School of Business, whose mission is to empower Asian and AAPI voices in our community. By subscribing to this podcast, you'll stay up to date on the latest Aconic episodes, and importantly, gain exclusive invitations to select Stanford Asian alumni events that can provide useful insights and a powerful network to help you on your personal and professional journeys. Go to aconicpodcast.com and subscribe today. Join us and be a part of a community that's shaping the future of Asian leadership.
2 years after that, I saw Steve, and Steve offered me another job, and I turned him down. So I'm the person who left Apple twice and turned Steve Jobs down for the third time. And if I was not such a dumbass and had stayed either of those times or accepted that job, I probably would have made $200 million. But now I get to tell that story.
So what's so funny is you studied, I believe, psychology in
Yes.
Stanford. And I think I read somewhere that your parents, like all other Asian parents, wanted you to either grow up to be a doctor, a lawyer, a dentist, or something to that reputable level, right? And so that actually made you apply to law school. Talk about that. What happened there?
Yeah, well, so look, early in my career at Stanford, I took a class that was basically you go to Stanford Medical Center and you walk with other students on rounds with one of the residents. And on the first day, I fainted. And And I said to myself, Guy, maybe you shouldn't be a doctor. And then I read that dentists have the highest rate of suicide. So I said, I don't think I should be a dentist. And then my father was a legislator in Hawaii, and he never went to college. He didn't have a law degree.
So wait,
So it
he
was
went from
kind of his
fireman.
dream.
He went from fireman to legislator.
He was a real estate broker in between, but yeah,
Wow.
if fire, he worked in the alarm bureau, which is the facility that they get the alarm and they send the engines out. So he wasn't climbing
Okay.
burning buildings, at least not that I know of. And then, so anyway, to make my parents happy, I applied to law school, and then I went to UC Davis for about 2 weeks and quit. And many people practice law for 20 years and figure out they're miserable. I figured that out in 20 days. So
Good for you, I guess, right? Good for you. You didn't have to waste another 19 plus years to do that. I have a lot of great friends who are lawyers, and I respect what they do, and obviously they're an important part of contributing. But that was not in the cards for you. By the
no,
way, no disrespect to UC Davis. I love UC Davis. You can actually see a little flag of UC Davis up there. Okay, so that was my undergrad. So I grew up in Cowtown. It was great. So what's interesting is then you actually decided to apply to business school, correct?
yes,
Now,
because that's what I wanted to do. I
that's
wanted
what
to be an
you
entrepreneur.
you want to be an entrepreneur. Okay. So let's talk about the process of the journey from leaving law school and applying to business school. It it did come with one hiccup, which was you wanted probably to go back to your alma mater, but that didn't happen, right?
Uh, in other words, I got rejected by Stanford. Okay, so this is a funny story. So when I was an undergrad at Stanford, I loved intramurals. So we had this big rivalry between my dorm and this fraternity. And the one of the star players of the fraternity and we really, had this big rivalry and stuff. And then come to find out, when I was applying to business school, he was the dean of admissions of the business school.
What?
He
I mean, how much
became the dean of admissions of the business school.
that
So I thought,
young?
oh my God, this guy is gonna put me in because we had this big rivalry. He knows who I am, and he's gonna like camaraderie between rival football players in intramural program. But they rejected me, so I was so pissed off. And then I got to complete the story. Years later, he applied to Apple when I was an executive there, and I made sure he didn't get the job.
Oh, I love it. This is no holds bar with you on your podcast. This is great. I'm sure if you saw him, you'd probably give him a big hug, right?
Oh,
Oh, by the way, Guy, we share two things in common already. I would say one, I also did some rounds and I pretty much fainted too. Or I saw I think I saw was it a burn victim video, and I couldn't even sit through the rest of it. So yes,
wow.
I share that with you. The other thing you and I share in common is I was rejected from the Stanford Business School. I actually applied to Stanford University 3 times before I got in. I got rejected as an undergrad. I got rejected the first time I applied to the business school, and I finally got in. So at least we share two things in common there, Guy.
So sometimes I accept speaking at the Stanford Business School just to tell that story.
A little rub it in your face type thing. I love it. So you went up to actually UCLA, which is an amazing school. Anderson. I have great friends that graduated from Anderson. And what's interesting, I think, is you didn't go to Apple right away. You actually ended up going to a school of hard knocks for sales, and probably a much harder industry than technology ever could be. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the MBA program at UCLA was a 4-day-a-week program. You had Fridays off. And I think it was to, get real world experience. So coming from the lower class of Kalihi Valley, I needed money. So I took a job working for a local diamond jewelry manufacturer, literally counting diamonds. And after I graduated, they made me an offer and I stayed with them and I eventually became the VP of sales and marketing of that company. And
Wow.
this was a jewelry manufacturer, not a retailer. So we sold to retailers. And it was the best education for me because you really had to learn how to sell. And today I think many people think selling is A/B tests, right? So is the purple link clicked on more than the blue link? Let's do this A/B test. That's not what sales is. Sales was hand-to-hand combat, and it taught me so much about, interacting with people, evangelizing things, and being a good salesperson. I credit a lot of my success to having to learn how to sell jewelry.
That's so funny. I have a friend, he was the dean at the Rotman School of Business, and we were having breakfast one day and we're talking about what are business schools missing. And one of the biggest elements that they miss that you need every single day in business is sales. They don't really have intensive courses on how to be great at sales. And so, to your point, that was probably an incredible, incredible skill set that is, we do it every day, right? We're even
Yeah,
on the
I mean,
podcast, we're selling.
I think this is an important lesson for your listeners that, many people may define sales as a person who has a title like salesperson, right? So the person trying to sell you a computer or sell you crypto or, sell you whatever. But really, when you check in the airport and you have an extra bag, you got to sell the person checking you in to take that bag for free. And when you are in coach in a middle seat and you're trying to get a window seat in first class, you're selling. And when you apply for a job, you're selling. When you're getting a raise, you're selling. When you're asking for a promotion, you're selling. When you're trying to convince your kids to do something, you're selling. If your lips are moving, you're selling. I wish people would understand that.
That's actually an incredible lesson, and I think you took that throughout your entire career, and let's talk about this. You went from the jewelry business and through was it serendipity, through actually one of the things you talk about in your Wise Guy book, you exploited a good connection there, but I guess you had your roommate kinda set you up well to land a job at Apple.
Yes,
Was that something you were looking
I
to do or
I owe my transition to tech to nepotism. And nepotism is the practice of hiring your friends and relatives. And I learned a very valuable lesson that how you get the job is not nearly as important as what you do once you get the job. So, yes, you can get your job through nepotism, through, old boys or old girls network or whatever. But after that, on the second day, it doesn't matter if you went to Harvard Business School or you're the boss's son. You just got to start delivering. And so I'm not nearly as critical of nepotism as most people because I would be hypocritical if I condemn nepotism. So, not that I'm a Kushner or anything, but yeah.
well, I think for our listeners, I think that's an important takeaway. 2 things. Everything requires some degree of being able to sell. So that's number 1, right? And number 2 is who you know matters and how well you know them and in what way you know them. Because if they can be an advocate for you, if they can be a source of reference that then
No.
lends credibility and trust to the person who doesn't know you, that's the way the world works. It's the way the world's worked for since the dawn of time that people trust other people. It's not just what they read and what they hear. It's oftentimes who they hear it from. And so I do think it's just, it's part of a realistic assessment of how life works. And so yes, like one of my biggest regrets probably in business schools, I didn't spend enough time getting to know my classmates
You
because
should have played intramurals.
I should have played intramurals. I should have shoe shined everyone's shoe. I mean, Anyway, so here you are at Apple, thanks to your roommate, Mike, who actually has his name on the inside of the Macintosh, I believe.
Yeah,
That's pretty
that
cool.
I don't. He
Yeah,
does.
he
Yeah.
does. Right? And it was such an interesting period. I think we got to take people back that when the Macintosh, and I had one, I got one it was my first computer ever, and I got it my first year of college in 1988, I think. And it looked so different than the main competitor, which was IBM at the time. I mean, it looked like a little, I don't know what you want, like a little cartoon figure, and almost like a Pokemon figure, right? Had a face, it smiled. You could imagine putting little feet on it and it would be
Yeah.
walking. And so here's this little cute computer that no one took seriously. And yeah, here you were evangelizing. And so exactly, um, and I know partly why, obviously I bought that versus the IBM PC. Um, but what were you evangelizing? What about it made it so unique, and what did it do in terms of changing the world?
I think the thing that made Macintosh so different from any other computer back then is at one level the user interface, because the user interface was much more intuitive and much more usable for regular people. But after you get past that, what happens with a Macintosh, it becomes an extension of yourself. So you think of a Macintosh as a way to make you more productive, more creative, more communicative. It extends yourself. And I would say with Windows and MS-DOS, you're fighting that. So you're trying to defeat your computer. It's not becoming part of you. And that's the philosophical difference.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. To me, having my Mac was like having a smart friend.
Yeah.
It really was. And,
I mean, you could draw a parallel to today that, some people think that AI is something you have to whip into shape, and other people like me think that AI extend you and make you better. And that's the way I approach Macintosh. That's the way I approach AI.
And I think that's the way you've approached technology. Sure, there are some bad actors, and they tend to have a disproportionate amount of influencing how people see technology. And unfortunately, they're in the news a lot, okay? Both their egos and how they, use technology to capitalize on things. But for the mass majority, we have benefited tremendously from
Mhm.
the democratization, as you say, of computing, which is exactly what Apple did. It made it friendly, it made it accessible, it made it approachable and desirable to actually want to use something that was sensorial, right? Like you actually visually saw something, you move something with your hands versus clicking on some cursors. I mean, it was so much more intuitive. And I think you're doing the same thing with Canva, actually, right? This idea of
Yeah, absolutely.
like design. I mean, the world of design is, I think, exponential in terms of its impact and our view of life, of beauty, of user interface, all that. And
You should be an evangelist.
I'll be your protege. I'll carry your briefcase around. Oh, your surfboard. Sorry, your surfboard around. On the Aconic Podcast, we really celebrate the idea of the hero's journey. And fortunately for us, one of our partner organizations is at the forefront of celebrating our great heroes and their stories. And that organization we work with is Gold House. Gold House is a cultural ecosystem that unites, invests, and champions Asian Pacific leaders to power tomorrow for all of us. To learn more, please visit goldhouse.org. So here you were basically at Apple for 4 years, and then you left. Why? I mean, you could have stayed there, been a, billionaire. You have been my
Well,
eighth billionaire on the show. So.
I there's two stories about why I left. You want the truth or you want the PR story?
Let's hear the truth. You've been unadulterated on this show. Let's keep it going.
So, a big part of my life, I love cars. I love cars. And it's not like I love cars to show off what I'm driving. I just love cars. I could drive a car in the middle of the night. Nobody sees me. And I just love to drive. I mean, I don't know why. I just do. Okay. So at Apple, if you were at a certain level called director and VP, Apple bought you a car. And I was one level below. So I go in for this job interview, not job interview, a job, my review. And the person I report to tells me, Guy, you have done very well with the small developers. They love you. They're creating all these small, innovative products. But the big developers, they do not like you. Microsoft does not like you. Ashton Tate does not like you. Lotus does not like you. And I'm thinking, they shouldn't like me. They're all jerk-offs and they're not doing Macintosh right. So I'm thinking, man, this review is going really great. But then he tells me, so because haven't done a good job with the large developers, I'm not promoting you to direct. And I was so pissed off with that. I was going to resign right there. But I went and saw my friend Jean-Louis Gasset. And I said, Jean-Louis, this is what happened. And he said, you know what, Guy? There's going to be a reshuffling. And I'm going to be your boss. And I'm going to review you in 6 months. So just stay 6 more months. And then I'll make you a director. Because it will always be good for your resume that you left as a director of Apple. And so I listened to him. And I stayed 6 more months. And he made me a director. And I quit the next day. So that's the real story of why I left. And then I left to start a Macintosh software company. So that's the flip side. That was the stick. The carrot was I started a Macintosh database company because I thought Macintosh was a great opportunity. I mean, if the Evangelist doesn't believe that it's a great opportunity, who else is going to believe, right?
What an amazing story. There's so much to unpack about that. I think the first review, I'm sure, was a painful thing to probably go through given your expectations versus what was actually the outcome. And then that might have actually planted 2 seeds. One is, okay, there's some power in probably getting that title, and maybe there's enough of a carrot to stay for 6 months. But the bigger picture stepping out was, I don't need these guys.
Well, except, so I left Apple. I started a company. It did okay, but not great. And then I came back to Apple as an Apple fellow and chief evangelist of the whole company. And then after about 2 years of that, I left that. And then 2 years after that, I saw Steve, and Steve offered me another job, and I turned him down. So I'm the person who left Apple twice and turned Steve Jobs down for the 3rd time. And if I was not such a dumbass and had stayed either of those times or accepted that job, I probably would have made $200 million. But now I get to tell that story.
Yeah,
So,
and I probably would have made more than that, actually, if you think about it. And here, let me just say, from my point of view, thank God you're a dumbass. Because we wouldn't have the benefit of you sharing your gospel of Aloha everywhere, right? And
that is literally true, because if I was at Apple today, they don't let employees write books or give speeches, or they certainly not going to let you do a podcast. I interviewed Mark Rober. Mark Rober is the YouTube personality. He does the Squirrel Olympics and the exploding shipping boxes. And he was working for Apple as he was getting successful with YouTube. And Apple's head explodes when, an employee becomes well-known as the employee. So I could have never written books or done a podcast. So I would have been a rich asshole, basically.
It's so funny what money can do, even to those enlightened and have wisdom. Money corrupts. It's hard. It's hard the gravity of money, right? So anyway,
I hope everybody has a chance to find out.
Right. You can't absolutely hate Apple, because at Apple, you actually met the love of your life.
That's true.
talk about that. How did that happen?
Yeah,
Was that
I'm
even encouraged?
this is so long ago that you could date someone at the company and not get arrested. I mean, it was, but she was not, she was not in any part of Apple that I ran or anything. But
You didn't
yeah,
report to her, right?
no, not at all. She didn't report to me, and yeah. So that's the love of my life. So Apple, they gave me. I think seriously, the amount of money I made from Apple stock, maybe $250,000, maybe $250,000. So $250,000, the love of my wife. I mean, you know, that's not bad.
No, that's your lottery. You won the lottery with wife, as you call it, wife 1.0.
Yeah. And I'm still on wife 1.0.
You're still on wife 1.0. I love that. And so you walked away with immense amount of treasure from Apple, regardless of what the monetary value might be.
Yes.
Um, you also, I think, turned down the potential to be the CEO of Yahoo early in Yahoo's development too.
Yeah,
So
well, that's a whole nother, that's more like $2.5 billion. So what happened was I get a call from Mike Moritz of Sequoia Capital, and he says, we started this company. It's going to be, this directory of people's favorite websites and e-commerce and all that. And I said, where is it? He goes, by Stanford. And at the time, my love of my life and I, we had one son. We were living in San Francisco. And I said, Mike, where I live in San Francisco, you'd have to get on 19th Street, come all the way across to 280, take 280 to Stanford. It would take an hour every way. I don't want to drive that much, Mike. I don't want to even apply. So I didn't apply. Probably would have gotten the job if I had applied. And then let's say I would have gotten, I don't know. It was very early. So maybe I would have gotten 5% of Yahoo. And through subsequent rounds, I would have been diluted and diluted and diluted. But maybe I would have ended up with, I don't know, 2% of Yahoo's, and 2% of Yahoo you get, and it goes public. Literally, it could have been worth $2 or $3 billion.
and your name would have been Jerry. So thank God you're a dumbass.
And then I would be MAGA today, and I would have donated $1 million to Donald Trump and go to the inauguration.
Well, I have to speak up for Jerry. He has been an incredible TAF, a supporter of TAF, and TAF has been an incredible sponsor for this program. So, the community, we have all, I think, walks and thoughts, and it's great. And I love how progressive you are. But I love more the idea that you've been a dumbass a couple of times, because otherwise you wouldn't have been a guest on this podcast, I think.
I should have another podcast called the Dumbass People Podcast.
I'll sign up for that one.
I'm going to go buy the Earl right now.
Yeah. So let's talk about this idea of being remarkable, because I think that's a big part of what you've been doing recently in terms of your writing, in terms of what you've been talking about. But I think it's also a great summation of all the life lessons you've learned. And actually, a lot of your previous 14 or 15 books fed into, I think, the ideas that are captured in, being remarkable, think remarkably, and about remarkable people. And I think you summarized it really well in that there are three qualities, the three Gs. Can you talk a little bit about each one of those? And as we get to the grit part, I actually want to talk about that part a lot, because
I love tricolons. I love tricolons. And I also love alliteration. So the three parts of my book are growth, grit, and grace. So that's a tricolon. And it's not just an alliteration with the first letter, it's alliteration with the first two letters. And maybe my last book will be called Growth, Grit, and Grave. But anyway, so growth is about this growth mindset. You can learn new things and do new things. And I'm a big fan of Carol Dweck, the mother of the growth mindset. The grit mindset is that if you have a growth mindset and you're trying new things, you better be gritty, because you're going to face a lot of challenges and failures. And the last part is the grace mindset, that at the end of your life, you realize that it's not about you anymore. And it's not about donating buildings. And it's not about, the glorification of your awesomeness. It's about paying back society and helping the next generation. So I think that remarkable people go through these three phases: growth, grit, and grace.
Yeah. So I love the first part on growth. A lot of the previous guests we had, they've all had to overcome, let's say, setbacks. And if you don't have a growth mindset, actually growth mindset is one of the key ingredients to overcome, let's say, life's challenges, right?
Yeah.
Both as I think, habit. Once you encounter difficulty, well, what new things can I learn about myself, learn about the situation that actually I can improve on versus the victim mindset. The other is, I just think this idea that it just opens new vistas, and you're a good prime example of that. And let's go back to the idea of Ohana. Ohana, you actually wanted to share, I think, experiences with your children, and that actually led you to take up both hockey and surfing. Hockey at
Yes.
age, I believe, 50, and surfing at age 60. I think every decade you're about to have
Something
to take
like
on a
that.
new one. I don't know what it might be. Hopefully, it's not pickleball.
Yeah. Well, yes, I took up hockey at 44. I took up surfing at 60. And let's just say that's about 40 years and 55 years too late for those respective sports.
But talk about why you did that. I think that's really interesting.
I don't know. I just fall in love with stuff and I do it. I fell in love with hockey. I fell in love with surfing. I fell in love with podcasting. I fell in love with Canva. I fell in love with Macintosh. I wish I could tell you I had this really organized, rational, statistically valid checklist to decide what to fall in love with, but it's kind of like my wife. You just fall in love.
You do. And
And
I love it
I
that your kids fell
pursue
in love.
what I fall in love with.
I also love it that your kids also, either before you or with you, fell in love with hockey, and they also fell in love
But
with
yeah,
surfing.
I've been trailing them. I follow them. And it's not like, if I'm Tiger Woods and I make my kid take up golf, the way it worked for me is my kid was playing hockey, so I took up hockey with them. Um, and I think it's kind of cooler because you're not trying to force your kid to do what you do, right? It's not like I'm forcing my kids to become podcasters.
Although
I,
I
I
bet I
want
bet
them to
one of
be
them might end up being
I want them to end up with well-paying jobs. I'm not going to tell them to be a podcaster.
I love that. This idea of reverse mentoring in true action, right? We've always talked about the idea of reverse mentoring, but how often as a parent, and I'm actually gonna sit down with my son today and have this conversation. What is it that they're interested that I may not know anything about, that I can become actively engaged and become a nerd or whatever, more proficient at? I think that's so powerful, Guy. And
Yeah,
if I had to
well,
take
I
out
mean,
two things from this, it was the Alohana, and then it was this. Okay. And the fact that you're a dumbass, and I love it.
well, I don't want people to give me too much credit. It's not like I sat down and said, it's better parenting if you fall in love with what they love better than you make them fall in love with you love. So that kind of intellectual, thinking never happened. I got on the ice and I loved skating. And then I got on a surfboard, a paddleboard at first, and I loved the sense of surfing. I mean, surfing is the most beautiful sport, and it is. And I think I love surfing so much, and I'm not that good at it, is because it is so hard. It is probably the hardest thing I've ever tried to learn because there are so many variables. There's like the tide, the size of the wave, the direction of the wave. There's other people in the water. There's the wind. I mean, there's the air temperature, the water temperature. There's the kelp in the water. There's the length of your board. There's the width of your board. There's the kind of fin that you have. I mean, there's so many things you got to think about that You cannot be like, all thinking about yourself. Especially the better you are at surfing, I think the less you need to think about it. But at my level, I need to think about every one of those variables every day.
So you've just demonstrated two of the key sort of qualities of being remarkable. The first is the idea that you're trying something new. The second is that you probably suck at it. And so you need the second quality, which is you need a lot
Grit.
of grit to
Yeah.
stick with it to actually, and you talk a lot about this where, when people are told to find their passion at like, I don't know, 15 years old, that's kind of a ridiculous statement given that,
It is.
they should be trying all these different things, find something that might interest them. And even then, they're not going to have a passion unless they get good at it. And getting good at it means you need the second quality, which is this idea of grit, right? So grit, it's a formula that interest plus grit might lead to passion.
I mean, that's the plan. And I think that by telling kids that they need to find their passion, we're making a mistake because it implies that, they're just going to fall in love with something. Now, I told you I fell in love with many things, but there's an act of like falling in love and then sticking with it. Right? So I fell in love with hockey, but I'll tell you something, it took me years to learn how to skate, and it's taking me years to learn how to surf. So it's not going to be a short journey, and you have to understand that. Or maybe it's better you don't understand that, because if you knew what it took to become a decent surfer, you might not start at 60.
Absolutely. This whole podcast was designed around the idea of grit because we are talking about people like yourself going through a hero's journey. And obviously, we talk about all the great accomplishments that you achieve, and that's sort of near the end of the journey, or call it journeys, right? Because you're having multiple. But it's what happens in the middle when you run into those major roadblocks in life. And
Yeah.
you
And you never hear about those
no,
from
and so
people.
for Guy, for you, I'm sure you've had many senses of disappointment, rejection, times when you looked in the mirror, Guy, and you said, this
Every time I
Ohana's
surf,
not
I
working.
have disappointment and rejection
So talk
every
about
day.
exactly. So talk about for you, what was one of those rock bottom moments for you when you looked and you said, "Man, I gotta reevaluate everything, including me specifically."
Not to bullshit you, but I cannot tell you that I've had that kind of moment that I was total quote unquote rock bottom. Um, I'm trying to think of a rock bottom time. You know, I haven't had rock bottom times, but on the other hand, I haven't had these like billionaire private airplane, hanging out with Taylor Swift kind of moments either. So I'm not complaining. I the secret to my success is that I am willing to work harder than most people. It's plain and simple. I love to work. I love to work.
So that's kind of your winning formulas when you hit those. And it sounds like you've had multiple rock bottoms. I mean, we talked about some of them, like getting rejected from Stanford, having a moment of epiphany,
That's
sitting.
not rock
I
bottom.
know, I know. Okay, well, difficult moments, right? But like making the transition of I'm sitting in the law school and this is not what I signed up for, right?
Yeah.
So I think you've had a lot of pivots, or reflecting that I should have probably said yes to that opportunity and I didn't. So what? Let's make the best of what's in front of me, kind of. And I guess this attitude of grit has allowed you to pretty much take those moments and
I just I just keep going. I just
keep
you
going.
should
That's great. So let's talk about the last G here, which is really the idea of grace. And now that you've gone through the growth mindset or used that and you've applied grit to actually be good at different things that you've learned. Talk about grace.
grace is the realization that you're not the freaking center of the earth, and that, if you should really ask yourself, how do you want to be remembered? Right? So for me, I want people to say that Guy empowered me to change the world. He did it with his writing, his speaking, his interviews, his investing, his advising, whatever it is, Guy, help me change the world. That's how I want to be remembered. I don't want to be remembered because I donated a building to Stanford, or, there's a museum named after me, or any of those kind of things. I want to help people. I want to help people be remarkable.
That's wonderful. And I know actually one of the most important platforms is the book, is actually the podcast. And you've used that as an opportunity to um, have your audience learn from incredibly remarkable people on actually how to become remarkable. And so talk a little bit about this idea of, that was a growth mindset for you. You'd never done a podcast. By the way, that's another thing you and I shared. I mean, I'm on episode 14. This is so new for me. I've never done podcasts either. So I mean, I was a double E in, electrical engineer making semiconductors at one point. I don't know how I ended up here, but
Yeah.
So, but let's talk about the podcast and your journey in doing that. And now you're at episode 200
Well,
plus.
my podcast is this kind of, at this point, a passion in my life. And I think that to be a good podcaster, you need 3 elements. Element number 1 is you need access to people. So it's not necessarily that you are their best friends, but they at least have to know of you so that they accept your invitation. So that's number 1. Number 2 is you need to have some kind of context. I mean, I think it would be very difficult to be a 20-year-old podcaster of remarkable people, because at 20 years old, you don't know what to ask them, right? And then the third thing is you need to have the balls to ask people the question you should ask them. And I look at those 3 factors and I say, Guy, you got all 3, man. You have this moral obligation to be a podcaster. So I ask people questions that nobody asked them before. And I take great pride in that. One of the things that makes me the happiest these days is when a guest says to me, nobody has ever asked me that question, and it is a great question. When I hear that, that's when what is it that peaks when you have a great experience? The pheromones, or I don't know, whatever.
Dopamine.
Dopamine, yeah. That's when I have a dopamine high, when I'm interviewing somebody and they say, nobody has ever asked me that, Guy. That is a great question.
So now 3 things. I was listening to those 3 qualities and I was like, okay, well, how does that fit with our podcast? Thank God I have an incredible team that is actually working on this. So from Access, we've got all the great people from TAF and from Gold House. I think the second thing you said was really important. And this idea of not being afraid of asking, right? That happened with me and you. I kind of said, Guy, you don't know me, but we have a shared thing and a passion, which is trying to make podcasts real. And I think we were able to connect on that. The other is being able to ask the hard questions. And lastly is just having the courage to make the ask itself. So I'm going to sort of reverse order those in some ways and say to you, look, we are looking for incredible, incredible guests, great Asian icons who can share their stories, their heroes' journeys. Guy, who would you like to see that you might actually know that would be a great guest for us to invite for the Aconic Podcast?
I'm scratching my head right now. Well, I mean, you could get the CEO of NVIDIA. I mean, that's a pretty remarkable guy, that guy.
Jensen's on our target list. We are hoping to make the second ask.
If you get him, tell him I want him too, okay?
Okay, you want to. You've actually had some incredible guests too. You've had Angela Duckworth, you've had Andrew Yang, who we've also had, and yet one of the things we want to tackle here is this idea of the taboo of failure in our community. Like somehow you can't fail, right? That just, or you're a model minority, and so perfection is the only thing you can expect.
Not me. I'm not a model minority.
You are not. You're
maybe other Asians are, not me. I don't give a shit.
You break the mold on so many things, Guy, which I love about you. Guy, you have been such a wonderful, unadulterated, giving, person and incredible guest. Thank you so much for your time
Oh,
today.
it's my pleasure. And now I'm going to go surf. So.
And go surf. And please own what you've created, which is Ohana. That is all you, Guy. So thank you so much, Guy.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Aloha.
Aloha. Listen to all episodes of Aconic on aconicpodcast.com. You can also catch new episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.